The whispers followed Fawn Feather like a shadow across the dusty boardwalk of Eureka, Nevada. Her footsteps echoed in the early morning silence of 1876, her dark eyes fixed straight ahead as she clutched her basket of herbs closer to her body, pretending not to hear the murmurs that trailed behind her. There she goes, that Indian girl. Why's she even allowed in town? Can't even speak proper English. Fawn had learned long ago that the safest response was silence. At 22, she had weathered enough storms of prejudice to know when to bend like the willow rather than stand firm like the oak. The daughter of a Shoshone woman and a white settler who had abandoned them both before she could walk, Fawn belonged nowhere completely. The Shoshone tribe had accepted her, but her mixed heritage had always marked her as different. In town, her native blood made her an outsider. Eureka had boomed with the discovery of silver, transforming overnight from a cluster of tents to a proper town with buildings of wood and stone. The miners, merchants, and opportunists who flocked there brought with them their prejudices, their fears, and their dismissal of the people who had walked this land for generations. Fawn approached Mrs. Hollister's general store, mentally rehearsing the English words she needed. Though she understood the language well enough, speaking it twisted her tongue in uncomfortable ways, and her Shoshone accent made townspeople mock her or pretend they couldn't understand. She preferred the flow of her native tongue, the way it connected her to her mother's people and the spirits of the land. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and Mrs. Hollister's perpetually pinched face greeted her with thinly veiled disdain. "What do you want?" The older woman asked, making no effort to hide her impatience. Fawn placed her basket on the counter. "Trade," she said, the single word coming out carefully. "Medicine plants, good for fever pain." Mrs. Hollister barely glanced at the carefully bundled herbs. "Don't need any of your savage remedies. Dr. Pearson's got proper medicine now." The rejection stung, but Fawn had anticipated it. She needed supplies: flour, salt, perhaps some coffee for the elder who had been kind to her after her mother's passing last winter. But trade was becoming increasingly difficult as the town grew and forgot its dependence on native knowledge. The door opened behind her, the bell announcing a new customer. Fawn gathered her basket, keeping her eyes lowered as she turned to leave. That's when she collided with him. He was tall, much taller than she was, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway. The impact sent her basket tumbling, herbs scattering across the wooden floor. "Whoa there," a deep voice said, strong hands steadying her before she could fall. "I didn't see you." Fawn pulled away instinctively, dropping to her knees to gather her precious herbs before they were trampled. To her surprise, the stranger knelt beside her. "Let me help you," he said, carefully collecting the bundled plants. Fawn risked a glance upward. The man wore the practical clothes of a rancher's sturdy trousers, a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing sun-bronzed forearms. A wide-brimmed hat cast shadows over his face, but she could see kind eyes the color of the summer sky and a strong jawline darkened by stubble. "Thank you," she whispered in English. He handed her the last bundle and helped her to her feet. "No harm done," he said with a smile that transformed his serious face. "Xavier Fullman," he introduced himself, touching the brim of his hat. "Just acquired the old Peterson place east of town." Before Fawn could decide whether to offer her name in return, Mrs. Hollister interjected from behind the counter. "Mr. Fullman, don't trouble yourself with her. That's just the half-breed girl from the hills. Barely speaks a civilized word." Xavier's expression hardened as he turned toward Mrs. Hollister. "Madam, I was raised to believe that helping a lady is never trouble." He turned back to Fawn. "May I know your name, miss?" Fawn hesitated, unused to such direct courtesy from a white man. "Fawn," she said softly. "Fawn Feather." "Miss Feather," he acknowledged with a nod. "Those herbs you're carrying, they look like ones my grandmother used to gather. She learned from the Cherokee back in Tennessee." Surprise flickered across Fawn's face. Before she could respond, Mrs. Hollister made an impatient sound. "If you're here for supplies, Mr. Fullman, I'd be happy to help you. We just got in some fine coffee from San Francisco." Xavier seemed reluctant to end the conversation, but he nodded. "Another time, perhaps, Miss Feather." Fawn slipped out of the store, her heart beating strangely in her chest. She told herself it was merely the shock of being treated with basic courtesy, nothing more. Yet as she made her way to the edge of town, she found herself glancing back, wondering about the man with the sky-colored eyes who had knelt to help her when others would have stepped over her. 3 days later, Fawn was gathering wild onions near the creek that ran along the eastern boundary of what had been Peterson land when she heard the approach of a horse. She straightened, immediately wary. Experience had taught her that lone riders could mean trouble for a woman alone, especially one with native blood. She considered slipping into the cover of the willows that lined the creek, but the rider had already spotted her. As the horse drew closer, she recognized the broad shoulders and hat of the man from the general store, Xavier Fullman. He reined in his chestnut, gelding a respectful distance away, and dismounted with the easy grace of a man accustomed to horses. "Miss Feather," he called, approaching slowly as if giving her time to flee if she wished. "I hoped I might find you out here." Fawn remained silent, wondering what he could want from her. "I was hoping to talk to you," Xavier continued, removing his hat as he drew near. Without the shadow it cast, she could see his face clearly, strong features softened by laugh lines around his eyes, though she judged him to be not much older than 30. "About herbs and such." "Why?" The question came out more bluntly than she intended. "My cattle," he explained. "2 of them are sick with something the town vet can't figure out. I remembered your herbs in the store and thought, well, I thought you might know something that could help." Fawn studied him, looking for signs of mockery or deceit. Finding none, she said, "Show me cattle, then I know." A smile broke across his face. "You'll help. That's mighty kind of you, Miss Feather." "Not kind," she corrected. "Trade you pay." "Of course," he said immediately. "Whatever's fair." The directness of his gaze was disconcerting. Most white men either looked at her with contempt or with a different kind of interest that made her skin crawl. Xavier looked at her as if she were simply a person worth listening to. "I come tomorrow," she decided. "Early. I'll be looking for you," he said, replacing his hat. "The main house is about a half-mile up from here, can't miss it. White with a red roof." As he turned to leave, he hesitated. "Miss Feather, may I ask you something?" She nodded cautiously. "The other day in the store, Mrs. Hollister said you barely speak English, but you understand me just fine, don't you?" Fawn considered her words carefully. "I understand, speaking is. Different how? Words feel wrong in mouth. People laugh when I talk." A flash of anger crossed his face, quickly contained. "People can be cruel about things they don't understand. My grandmother used to say that knowing 2 ways to speak means having 2 ways to see the world. Sounds like wisdom to me, not something to mock." With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Fawn staring after him, a strange warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. True to her word, Fawn arrived at Xavier's ranch as the first light of dawn was breaking over the mountains. She carried a leather pouch containing various herbs and remedies, uncertain what she would need until she saw the animals. The ranch house was exactly as he had described, a solid 2-story structure with fresh white paint and a roof of red cedar shingles. A barn stood nearby, along with several corrals and outbuildings. It was modest compared to some of the ranches established by wealthy Easterners, but well built and carefully maintained. As she approached, the front door opened and Xavier emerged, already dressed for work in a blue cotton shirt and well-worn denim trousers. His face brightened when he saw her. "Miss Feather, you're early. I was just about to head to the barn." "Sun tells time," she replied simply, following as he led the way to a small corral beside the barn where 2 cows had been separated from the rest of the herd. Even to Fawn's untrained eye, they looked on, their coats dull, heads hanging low. "They won't eat," Xavier explained. "Been like this for 3 days. The vet from town said it might be poisoning from some plant, but he couldn't say which one." Fawn moved closer to the animals, observing their behavior. She knelt to examine the sparse vegetation growing within the corral, then looked up at Xavier. "Water." "Where they drink. There's a stream that runs through the north pasture. That's where they were before they got sick." She nodded. "Show me." They walked together across the ranch land, the cool morning air gradually warming as the sun climbed higher. Xavier maintained a respectful distance, but his curiosity was evident. "Have you lived around here all your life?" he asked as they followed a well-worn cattle trail. "Yes, born near Pine Mountains, moved after." She hesitated, unsure how to explain the complicated history that had pushed her people from their traditional lands. After white men came more and more, Xavier's expression sobered. "I know there's a history here I'm walking into. I'm sorry if my being here is part of a problem that started long before me." His acknowledgement surprised her. Most settlers acted as if the land had been empty before their arrival, or worse, as if they were entitled to take it regardless of who had been there first. "You different," she observed. He chuckled. "My pa would agree with you there. Never did fit in with what he thought a son should be." His smile faded slightly. "My mother was half Cherokee. Pa married her anyway, against his family's wishes. When she died, he was left with a son who reminded him too much of what he'd lost and what his family had disowned him for." The revelation that he had native blood, however diluted, explained some of his understanding. Yet many mixed-blood people worked harder than anyone to distance themselves from their native heritage. Xavier seemed to carry his with a quiet acknowledgement. They reached the stream, and Fawn immediately began examining the plants growing along its banks. After several minutes of careful inspection, she pointed to a cluster of white flowers with delicate fern-like leaves. "This, water hemlock, very poison, cattle eat, get sick, die." Xavier crouched beside her, studying the plant. "I've never seen this before. How do you know it's poisonous?" "Mother taught, all plants have spirits, some heal, some harm." She pulled her knife from her belt and carefully cut away the entire patch, being cautious not to touch the roots. "Must burn, then check all water places for more. Will my cows recover? If not, eat too much. I have medicine to help." She stood, wiping her blade clean on a clump of grass. "Need make tea from this." She opened her pouch and showed him some dried leaves. "Give with water, clean stomachs." Xavier was watching her with undisguised admiration. "The vet charged me $5 to tell me he didn't know what was wrong." "You found the problem in minutes." Fawn shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "No plants, not special." "Knowledge is always special, Miss Feather, especially knowledge that saves lives." He gathered the cut hemlock carefully. "Will you show me these other poisonous plants I should watch for?" "And the good ones too. I'd pay you for the lessons." The request was unexpected. "Why you want learn?" "Because I aim to make this land my home for many years to come. Seems foolish not to understand what grows on it." He held her gaze steadily. "And because I respect what you know." That simple statement, "I respect what you know," touched something deep inside Fawn. All her life, the white world had dismissed native knowledge as primitive superstition. Even those who sought out native remedies in times of need would deny their value once the crisis had passed. "I teach," she decided. "You pay with flour, coffee, sugar. Good trade." "Good trade," Xavier agreed with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "And maybe you could teach me a few words of your language too. If I'm going to learn about the land, I ought to understand the words its first people used to describe it." Fawn stared at him, genuinely shocked. No white person had ever expressed interest in learning Shoshone. Most demanded that natives abandon their tongue entirely in favor of English. "You want learn Shoshone words, if you're willing to teach me," he said. "My grandmother used to say that each language sees the world in its own way. I'd like to understand how your people see this land we're standing on." For the first time since their meeting, Fawn smiled, a small, cautious curving of lips that nevertheless transformed her solemn face. "Tomorrow, I bring medicine for cows, then start teaching." Xavier's answering smile was warm enough to rival the spring sun overhead. "I'll be looking forward to it, Miss Feather." Fawn delivered the promised medicine the next day, a strong-smelling tea made from several herbs that would help the cows expel the toxins from their systems. Xavier insisted on paying her with not only the agreed-upon supplies, but also a small pouch of hard candies that made her eyes widen with surprise. "A little something extra," he said with a smile, "for saving my livestock." The cattle began to improve by the following day, and their recovery cemented an arrangement between Fawn and Xavier. 3 times a week, she would come to the ranch and teach him about the local plants which were edible, which medicinal, which dangerous. He proved to be an attentive student, his hands gentle as he learned to identify and gather herbs under her guidance. After the first week, as promised, Fawn began teaching him Shoshone words. They started with simple terms, the names of plants they studied, basic greetings, numbers. Xavier's pronunciation made her laugh at first, but he was undeterred by his mistakes. Painqui, she would say, pointing to a fish swimming in the creek. Painqui, he would repeat, his tongue stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds. No, listen, Painqui. Painqui, he would try again, coming closer. His determination to get it right touched her. Each time he successfully pronounced a difficult word, his face would light up with such boyish pride that Fawn couldn't help but smile in return. As spring warmed into summer, their lessons expanded beyond plants and language. Xavier showed Fawn how he was training his horses, and she taught him tracking skills passed down through generations of her mother's people. They shared stories, Xavier of his childhood in Tennessee, Fawn of the Shoshone legends that explained the world around them. During these months, Fawn found herself changing in subtle ways. She stood taller when she walked through town, no longer keeping her eyes down. She spoke more, even in her accented English, growing confident enough to correct those who assumed she couldn't understand complex ideas. Xavier changed too. His initial friendliness deepened into genuine respect and curiosity. He began incorporating Shoshone words into his daily speech, referring to plants and animals by their native names as often as their English ones. When neighboring ranchers visited, he would casually mention something Fawn had taught him, attributing the knowledge to her without hesitation or embarrassment. One hot afternoon in July, they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree near the creek, taking refuge from the midday sun. Fawn was showing Xavier how to weave a small basket from reeds, his large fingers clumsy but persistent as they attempted to mimic her deft movements. "I'm making a mess of this," he admitted with a self-deprecating laugh, holding up his lopsided creation. "First try always bad," Fawn assured him, her English flowing more easily after months of regular conversation. "My first basket, Mother said, looked like bird nest after storm." Xavier chuckled, then grew thoughtful. "You don't speak much about your mother. She passed on, didn't she?" Fawn nodded, her hands continuing their work. "Last winter, fever came, many sick in camp." She was quiet for a moment. "She was good woman, strong, taught me everything. And your father, never knew him, white traitor, left before I was born." She kept her eyes on the basket. "Mother said he had kind eyes but weak heart." Xavier set his mangled attempt at weaving aside. "Is that why the town treats you poorly? Because your father was white?" "Because I am neither," Fawn corrected. "To white people I am Indian, to many Shoshone I am too white." She shrugged as if it didn't matter, though they both knew it did. "No place is home." Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "My mother felt that way too Indian for the white world, too white for the Cherokee." His blue eyes held a distant pain. "Before she died, she told me to make my own place in the world. That home isn't always where you're born, but where you choose to plant yourself and grow." "Is that why you came here, to plant yourself?" "Partly." He picked up a smooth stone from beside the creek, turning it over in his palm. "After my father died last year, there wasn't much keeping me in Tennessee. I wanted open country, a fresh start." He smiled ruefully. "Though I didn't expect to be so ignorant about the land I was buying." "Good you found teacher then," Fawn said with a hint of teasing. "The best teacher," Xavier agreed, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that made her heart quicken. "I've learned more from you in these months than I learned in years of formal schooling." The sincerity in his voice warmed her more than the summer sun. For a moment, neither spoke, and Fawn became acutely aware of how close they were sitting, of the gentle sound of the creak, of Xavier's eyes still on her face. He cleared his throat suddenly. Would you teach me how to say something specific in Shoshone? What words you want learn?" "How would I say you are beautiful?" The question caught her off guard, heat rising to her cheeks. "Why you need know that?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Just seems like useful words for a man to know." Fawn hesitated, then softly said, E Puiuna. E Puiuna, he repeated carefully, getting the pronunciation nearly perfect. Then, still holding her gaze, he said, E Puiuna, Fawn Feather. The world seemed to still around them. In that moment, Fawn could hear her mother's warning voice in her memory, cautioning her about white men and their honeyed words. Yet Xavier had proven himself different in so many ways. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the spell between them. Xavier stood quickly, his hand moving instinctively to the pistol at his hip as 3 riders appeared along the creek bank. Fawn recognized them immediately: Warren Blackwood and his 2 ranch hands, owners of the largest cattle operation in the area. Blackwood was known for his ruthless business practices and his particular disdain for the native population. Well, Blackwood called as they drew near. If it isn't Fullman and his pet Indian. Xavier's posture stiffened, but his voice remained even. Afternoon, Blackwood. Something I can help you with. Blackwood's gaze slid dismissively over Fawn before returning to Xavier. Just riding my property line, making sure there's no trespassing. We're well within my boundaries, Xavier replied coolly. As you know. For now, Blackwood said with a thin smile. But a man never knows when boundaries might change, especially when he makes questionable associations. His eyes flicked meaningfully to Fawn. People talk, Fullman, about your frequent visits from this woman. Xavier took a step forward, his voice dropping dangerously. Miss Feather has been kind enough to educate me about local plants and medicines, saving me considerable time and money. If people are talking, they do better to mind their own affairs. Just offering friendly advice, Blackwood said, though nothing about his demeanor suggested friendliness. A newcomer like yourself might not understand how things work out here. Some kinds of company can damage a man's reputation, make it hard to do business. I'll choose my own company, thank you, Blackwood shrugged. Suit yourself. But don't say I didn't warn you when you find yourself unwelcome in decent establishments. He tipped his hat mockingly. Madam. The 3 men rode away, leaving a tense silence in their wake. Xavier's hands were clenched at his sides, his jaw tight with barely contained anger. You should not make enemy of him, Fawn said quietly. He has power in town. Xavier turned to her, his expression fierce. I won't let a man like that dictate who I can speak with or learn from. He right about one thing: people talk, say bad things about you because of me. Let them talk, Xavier said firmly. I've never much cared for the opinions of fools. Fawn gathered her things, suddenly feeling the weight of unwanted attention. The easy comfort they had shared moments before had been shattered by Blackwood's intrusion, a harsh reminder of the world beyond their private lessons. I should go, she said, sun getting low. Xavier looked as if he wanted to protest but nodded. I'll walk you to the edge of the property. They walked in silence, the earlier intimacy replaced by an awkward tension. At the boundary of his land, Fawn turned to him. Maybe better not have lessons for while, she suggested reluctantly. Wait for talk to die. Fawn, Xavier said, using her given name for the first time, I won't pretend that Blackwood's threats don't concern me, not for myself but for how they might affect you. The last thing I want is to make your life more difficult. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. But I also won't let fear of gossip dictate my actions. Not just gossip, she reminded him. Blackwood can hurt your business, make other ranchers not sell to you, not buy from you. There are other markets, other ranchers. His expression softened. What about you? Are you worried about how people will treat you because of our friendship? Fawn almost laughed at the question. People already treat me bad, cannot get worse. It could, Xavier said soberly, and that's what worries me. She considered his words, touched by his concern. No one had worried about her welfare since her mother's death. I'm not afraid, she decided, but we be more careful, not meet where people can see for a while. Relief washed over his face. So you'll still teach me? Fawn nodded, finding herself unwilling to end their time together despite the risks. Still teach, you still bad at basket, need much practice. His laugh broke the tension, warm and genuine. Fair enough. How about I ride out to the eastern ridge tomorrow? There's a stand of pine trees there that's still on my property but can't be seen from the road. I know place. We'll meet you there midday. As she turned to leave, Xavier called after her softly, Dikaboot, Fawn. Thank you in her own tongue, the words pronounced with careful precision. Despite the shadow Blackwood had cast over the day, Fawn found herself smiling as she walked home. The following weeks brought a shift in their relationship. Their meetings became more secretive, held in remote corners of Xavier's property or in the hidden valleys of the surrounding hills. Yet this necessary caution seemed to intensify their connection rather than diminish it. Each lesson became precious, a stolen moment away from judging eyes. Xavier's progress in Shoshone accelerated, his vocabulary expanding beyond simple nouns to include verbs, expressions, even jokes that made Fawn laugh at his creativity. In turn, Fawn's English became more fluent, though she still spoke with an accent that Xavier insisted was beautiful. "It's like music," he told her once as they sat beside a small fire in a sheltered ravine, the autumn chill necessitating the warmth. "The way you shape English words with Shoshone rhythms, like you're singing even when you're just talking about cattle feed." "You tease me," she accused, though she was smiling. "Never," he replied, his expression growing serious. "I admire you, Fawn, your strength, your knowledge, your patience with a slow-learning rancher." "Not so slow," she conceded. "You learn good." "Well," he corrected automatically, then grinned. "See, now I'm the teacher. Bad teacher. Always interrupting." Their laughter mingled in the crisp air, and Fawn realized with sudden clarity that these moments with Xavier had become the brightest parts of her days. Despite their caution, rumors had spread through town about the rancher and the Indian woman who visited him regularly. Fawn found herself subjected to even colder treatment when she went to town for supplies. Shopkeepers serving her with barely concealed contempt, women crossing the street to avoid her path. Xavier faced his own consequences. Several local ranchers refused to do business with him, forcing him to travel farther to buy and sell cattle. The town's social invitations dried up, and he reported overhearing whispers about going native when he visited the saloon. Yet neither of them suggested ending their arrangement. If anything, the opposition seemed to strengthen Xavier's resolve to learn everything Fawn could teach him. One evening in late October, as sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Xavier rode out to a spot they had agreed upon, a small meadow nestled between rocky outcroppings that provided natural shelter from the wind. He carried a bundle wrapped in canvas tied to his saddle, a mysterious addition to their usual meeting. Fawn was already there, tending a small fire. She had begun building fires for their meetings as the weather cooled, demonstrating how her people made them quickly with minimal smoke. "You're early," Xavier observed as he dismounted, leading his horse to a patch of grass. "Good day for gathering," she explained, gesturing to several bundles of plants laid out on a hide beside her. "Found manzanita berries still good and pine nuts ready for harvest." Xavier settled beside her, the firelight playing across his features. Over the months, Fawn had come to know every line of his face, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how his brow furrowed when he concentrated on a difficult Shoshone word. "I brought something," he said, retrieving the canvas bundle. A gift of sorts. Fawn watched curiously as he unwrapped the package to reveal a book bound in worn leather. "This was my mother's," he explained, handling it with reverence. "She couldn't read English very well, but my father taught her. This was her favorite poetry about nature, the changing seasons, the beauty of wild places." He offered the book to Fawn, who took it carefully. She opened it, running her fingers over the printed words she couldn't decipher. "I can't read," she admitted quietly. "I know," Xavier said gently. "I thought, if you wanted, I could teach you, the way you've taught me so much." Fawn looked up at him, touched by the offer. "You would teach me reading, writing, whatever you want to learn." He moved closer, turning to a page marked with a ribbon. "Like this one. It's about autumn, about the beauty of leaves turning gold and red before they fall." As the firelight flickered, Xavier began to read aloud, his deep voice giving life to words about the glory of the season surrounding them. Fawn listened, entranced not just by the poetry, but by the reverence with which he shared this piece of his mother's legacy. When he finished reading, their eyes met over the open book. Something had changed between them, a shift as subtle and inevitable as the turning of leaves outside. "Xavier," she said softly, his name still feeling new on her lips. "Why you do all this? Learn my words, share your mother's book, risk people's anger." For a long moment he was silent, the crackling fire the only sound between them. Then, carefully closing the book and setting it aside, he took her hand in his. "Because from the moment I saw you in that store, something told me you were important, not just your knowledge, though that's remarkable. You." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "The way you move through the world with quiet dignity despite how cruelly it treats you. The way you see beauty and meaning in plants others would trample without notice. The way you laugh when I mangle your language but keep teaching me anyway." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "In Tennessee, my grandmother used to say that souls recognize each other, even when minds are still strangers. I think my soul recognized yours, Fawn Feather." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Fawn felt a tightness in her chest, a mixture of longing and fear. She had grown to care deeply for this man who saw her as no one else did, yet the world seemed determined to keep them apart. "Dangerous," she whispered. "To feel this way." "The most dangerous things are often the most worthwhile," Xavier replied, his voice low and certain. "I'm not asking for promises, Fawn. I just needed you to know that what I feel for you goes beyond friendship or admiration." A sudden gust of wind sent sparks swirling upward from their fire, tiny points of light against the darkening sky. Fawn watched them rise and fade, like the possibilities spinning between them, brilliant, ephemeral, uncertain. "I feel also," she admitted finally, her voice barely audible above the fire's crackle, "but not know what to do with feeling." Xavier's smile was gentle, patient. "We don't have to decide tonight, or tomorrow, or next week. We have time." But they didn't have as much time as they thought. The following morning, Fawn was collecting water from the creek near her small cabin when she heard approaching horses. Looking up, she saw 3 men from town, including Sheriff Davis and Warren Blackwood. "Fawn Feather," the sheriff called, his hand resting meaningfully on his holstered pistol. "We need to have a word with you." Fawn set down her water bucket, her heart pounding. "What wrong?" "There's been cattle missing from several ranches," Sheriff Davis said, his eyes cold. "Blackwood here lost 5 head last week. Tracks leading from his property head this direction." "I take no cattle," Fawn said firmly. "Have no need for cattle." "Wouldn't be the first time your people helped themselves to a rancher's stock," Blackwood interjected, his voice dripping with contempt. "Though usually they at least have the decency to move the stolen animals farther than a mile away." With growing alarm, Fawn realized what was happening. Blackwood was using the missing cattle as a pretext to cause trouble for her and by extension for Xavier. "I not steal," she insisted. "I trade fair for what I need." The third man, a ranch hand Fawn recognized from Blackwood's property, smirked. "She's been mighty friendly with Fullman lately." "Maybe she's trading more than herbs, if you take my meaning." Sheriff Davis dismounted, his expression grim. "I need to search your cabin, Fawn. If there's no evidence of rustling, you've got nothing to worry about." Fawn knew it was pointless to refuse. The sheriff would search with or without her permission, and resistance would only make her appear guilty. She stepped aside, watching anxiously as the men invaded her small home. They were thorough and careless, appending her few possessions, dumping out containers of carefully stored herbs, even slicing open her sleeping mat. Fawn stood in silent rage as they desecrated the space where her mother had taught her to heal, to pray, to survive. "Well, well," Blackwood called from behind her cabin. "What have we here?" Fawn turned to see him holding up a branding iron, one she had never seen before. "That not mine," she said immediately. "Never see before." "Funny," Blackwood said, examining the iron. "This looks exactly like my brand." "And here it is, hidden behind your cabin." "You put there," Fawn accused, anger overriding caution. "You bring to blame me." Sheriff Davis took the branding iron, examining it with a frown. "This is serious, Fawn. Cattle rustling carries heavy penalties." "I not take cattle." "He lie to hurt me, hurt Xavier Fullman." At the mention of Xavier's name, Blackwood's expression darkened further. "Are you suggesting I'd go to these lengths over some petty grievance?" "The woman's clearly guilty, Sheriff, My brand doesn't just walk itself into her possession. I'm going to have to take you in, Sheriff Davis said, reaching for her arm. You'll get a fair hearing, but she'll get a lynching is what she'll get, came a familiar voice. All heads turned to see Xavier riding hard toward them, reining in his horse in a spray of dust. What the hell is going on here? Relief flooded through Fawn at the sight of him, though it was quickly replaced by fear for his safety. Blackwood and his man both wore guns, and the tension in the air was palpable. Official business, Fullman, Sheriff Davis said warily. Found evidence of cattle rustling. Miss Feather here had Blackwood's branding iron hidden behind her cabin. That's convenient, Xavier said, his voice dangerously calm as he dismounted. Especially since Blackwood was boasting at the saloon last night about how he'd solve his Indian problem once and for all. Sheriff Davis glanced at Blackwood, whose face had reddened with anger. You calling me a liar, Fullman? Blackwood snarled. I'm saying that branding iron was planted, and anyone with half a brain can see it. Xavier turned to the sheriff. Davis, you know as well as I do that a woman living alone couldn't rustle and slaughter 5 grown cattle without help. And where's the meat, the hides? 5 cattle leave evidence. The sheriff frowned, looking more carefully at the branding iron in his hand. That's a fair point. He's just defending her because he's besotted with the savage, Blackwood spat. Everyone in town knows it, probably helped her steal the cattle himself. Xavier's hand dropped to his holster. Say that again, Blackwood. Sensing the situation spiraling toward violence, Sheriff Davis stepped between the two men. That's enough. Nobody's shooting anybody today. He turned to Fawn. Miss Feather, I'm not convinced either way, but I can't ignore a branding iron with Blackwood's mark. You'll need to come to town until we sort this out. If she goes, I'm coming too, Xavier insisted. And I'm sending for Judge Harmon in Silver Springs. He's honest, at least, won't let a trumped-up charge stand. The sheriff nodded reluctantly. Fair enough. But no more accusations until we get this properly investigated. He turned to Blackwood. That goes for you too, Warren. Blackwood's face was a mask of barely contained rage, but he nodded curtly. As they prepared to leave, Xavier moved to Fawn's side, speaking softly in Shoshone. Nama Naningkupai. Don't be afraid. Despite everything, Fawn felt a surge of pride at his perfect pronunciation. She replied in the same language, I fear not for myself, but for what may come between us. Xavier's eyes held hers, steady and determined. Nothing will come between us unless we allow it. The ride to Eureka was tense and silent. Sheriff Davis kept Fawn beside him, while Xavier and Blackwood rode at opposite ends of the small procession. As they entered town, people stopped to stare and whisper. Fawn held her head high, refusing to show the shame they expected. The town jail was a small building with just 2 cells. Sheriff Davis led Fawn to the smaller one, apologizing awkwardly as he locked her inside. I'll arrange for some food to be brought over from the hotel, he offered. And Fullman here can stay and talk with you so long as I'm present. Once they were as alone as circumstances allowed, Xavier gripped the bars of her cell, his knuckles white. This is my fault, he said in a low voice. Blackwood is using you to get at me. I should have been more careful, more aware of the danger. Not your fault, Fawn insisted. He hate me before you, hate all my people. I've already sent my ranch hand to Silver Springs for Judge Harmon, Xavier assured her. He's expected in 3 days. Until then, I'll stay in town, make sure nothing happens. Fawn nodded, drawing strength from his determination. 3 days not long, I wait. Xavier glanced at the sheriff, who was pointedly examining papers at his desk, then lowered his voice further. Fawn, when this is over. When you're free, I want to ask you something important, but not here, not like this. Before she could respond, the door to the jail opened, and Mrs. Hollister entered with a tray of food. Her pinched face registered shock at seeing Xavier standing so close to Fawn's cell. Mr. Fullman. I didn't expect to see you here, Mrs. Hollister, he acknowledged coolly. I'm ensuring that Miss Feather receives fair treatment while this misunderstanding is resolved. The older woman set the tray down with unnecessary force. Hardly a misunderstanding when Blackwood's brand was found in her possession. The whole town's talking about it. The whole town would do better to wait for evidence and proper justice, Xavier replied. Mrs. Hollister sniffed disapprovingly. Well, I never thought I'd see a man of your standing taking the word of an Indian over a respected rancher like Mr. Blackwood. She turned to leave, adding over her shoulder, your poor mother would be turning in her grave. Xavier's jaw clenched, but he remained silent until the door closed behind her. Don't listen to her, he told Fawn. My mother would have admired your courage and dignity in the face of such injustice. Sheriff Davis cleared his throat. Getting late, Fullman. You should get some rest at the hotel. Nothing more to be done tonight. Xavier nodded reluctantly. I'll be back in the morning, he promised Fawn. Try to sleep if you can. After he left, Fawn sat on the narrow cot, trying to quiet her racing thoughts. She had known that her friendship with Xavier would bring complications, but she hadn't anticipated this level of malice from Blackwood. Now, she worried not just for herself, but for Xavier's reputation, and standing in the community he had chosen as his home. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by unfamiliar sounds and lingering anxiety. When morning arrived, Fawn was awakened by the murmur of voices outside the jail. Rising to peer through the small window, she saw a crowd gathering in the street, their faces hard with hostility. Sheriff Davis entered, looking troubled. Got a situation brewing, he told her. Blackwood's been stirring folks up, talking about cattle rustling becoming a serious problem. Some of them are demanding immediate action. Lynch mob, Fawn said flatly, familiar enough with frontier justice to understand the implication. Davis didn't deny it. I've sent word to Fullman. He's coming with some of his ranch hands. I won't let anyone take you from this jail, Fawn. You have my word on that. Before she could respond, the door burst open and Xavier strode in, his expression thunderous. Davis, there are 20 men out there talking about breaking down your door. What are you going to do about it? The sheriff checked his rifle. My deputy and I will hold them off. Judge Harmon will be here tomorrow. One more day. Xavier shook his head. That crowd isn't waiting until tomorrow. He moved to Fawn's cell. We need to get you out of here. And go where? She asked. They find me, kill me. I have a plan, Xavier said, turning to the sheriff. Davis, you know this charge is nonsense. Help us. For a long moment, Sheriff Davis stood silent, weighing his duty against his conscience. Finally, he sighed heavily and reached for his keys. There's a back door through the storeroom, he said as he unlocked Fawn's cell. My horse is saddled behind the building. Take it and ride north into the hills. There's an old line shack about 5 miles up where the Jenkins claim used to be. Hole up there until I can send word that it's safe to return. Xavier clasped the sheriff's hand. Thank you, I won't forget this. Just go, Davis urged. I'll tell them you overpowered me and escaped. It'll buy you time. They moved quickly through the storeroom to the rear of the building. As promised, the sheriff's horse waited, already saddled. Xavier helped Fawn mount, then swung up behind her. Hold tight, he murmured, and spurred the horse into motion. They rode hard, away from town and into the rugged hill country to the north. Behind them, they heard shouts as their escape was discovered, but the sounds faded as distance and terrain separated them from pursuit. The old line shack was little more than a single room with a stone fireplace, abandoned years ago when the Jenkins family had given up on their mining claim. It offered shelter, however, and a defensible position if they were followed. Xavier secured the horse in a stand of trees behind the shack, then helped Fawn inside. The interior was dusty but intact, with a rough wooden table, a chair, and a crude bed frame with a straw-filled mattress. It's not much, Xavier apologized, lighting a small oil lamp he found on a shelf. But it should keep us safe until Davis can calm things down. Fawn sank onto the chair, the events of the past day catching up with her. Why you risk everything for me? Your ranch, you're standing in town all in danger now. Xavier knelt before her, taking her hands in his. Because none of that matters compared to your safety. Because he broke off, seeming to search for words. Because what? Fawn pressed gently. Because I love you, he said simply. I've been trying to find the perfect moment, the perfect words to tell you, but there's nothing perfect about any of this. Yet my feelings couldn't be more certain. He squeezed her hands. I love your strength, your wisdom, your gentle heart. I love the way you've opened my eyes to see the world differently. I love who I am when I'm with you, a better man, a more complete person. Fawn felt tears welling in her eyes, years of guarded emotions breaking free at his declaration. "Dangerous love," she whispered. "World not want us together." "The world doesn't get a vote," Xavier replied firmly. "Only you and I decide what happens between us." He reached up to touch her cheek. "Inai Yawi Fawn, I love you. In English or Shoshone, the feeling is the same." Fawn leaned into his touch, the walls she had built around her heart crumbling beneath the weight of his sincerity. "Nu Nai Yawi knees," she whispered. "I love you too." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer shared between them. When they parted, both were smiling despite the circumstances that had brought them to this moment. "What we do now?" Fawn asked. "We wait," Xavier replied, moving to check the fireplace. "Davis will send word when it's safe, then we face whatever comes next together." As night fell, they built a small fire to ward off the autumn chill. Xavier had found some emergency supplies in a trunk: jerky, coffee, a few tins of beans, enough to sustain them for a day or two. They sat close together, sharing warmth and whispered conversations about the future they hoped to build. "My ranch has plenty of room," Xavier said as they watched the flames dance. "The cabin where you live now, it holds memories of your mother, I know, but perhaps you might consider making a new home with me." The offer hung in the air, momentous and life-changing. Fawn thought of her small cabin, the solitary existence she had led since her mother's death. She thought of the town that had never accepted her, the daily indignities she endured. Then she thought of Xavier, his patient learning of her language, his defense of her against Blackwood, his unwavering respect for her knowledge and heritage. "Yes," she said, the single word carrying the weight of all she felt. "New home with you." Joy illuminated his face, and he pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We'll make it a place where both worlds are honored, where our children will speak both languages and carry both traditions." Children. Fawn echoed, surprised by how naturally he spoke of a future she had scarcely dared to imagine. "If you want them," Xavier amended quickly. "I'm getting ahead of myself, I know," Fawn smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "I want, someday, first must solve cattle problem." "First things first," he agreed. They spent the night in the small shack, sleeping in turns, alert for any sign of pursuit. Morning came with no disturbance, bringing cautious hope that Sheriff Davis had managed to contain the situation in town. By midday, they heard the approach of a horse. Xavier positioned himself at the window with his pistol ready, while Fawn took cover behind the stone fireplace. The tension eased when they recognized Sheriff Davis dismounting alone. "It's safe to come out," he called. "Judge Harmon arrived early. He's waiting in town." They emerged cautiously, and Davis explained the developments of the past hours. "Blackwood overplayed his hand," the sheriff said. "Started threatening me for allowing the escape, made some wild accusations about a conspiracy between me, Fullman, and half the Shoshone nation to steal his cattle." He shook his head. Judge Harmon wasn't impressed, ordered a proper investigation, which turned up something interesting: those missing cattle. They were found in a box canyon on Blackwood's own property, apparently missed during the initial search. "Convenient," Xavier remarked dryly. "Mighty convenient," Davis agreed. "Especially since my deputy found fresh tracks showing they'd been moved there recently, after the accusation was made against Fawn." Fawn and Xavier exchanged looks of vindication. "Judge wants to see both of you," Davis continued. "He's a fair man. Doesn't hold with trumped-up charges or frontier justice." The return to Eureka was tense but uneventful. The crowd that had gathered the previous day had dispersed, though curious eyes watched from windows and doorways as they rode down the main street to the courthouse. Judge Harmon was a tall, austere man with piercing gray eyes and a reputation for strict adherence to the law. He listened carefully as Fawn, through Xavier's occasional translation assistance, explained her side of the events. He then heard Xavier's account of Blackwood's threats and previous antagonism. When Blackwood was called to testify, his story began to unravel under the judge's pointed questioning. By the end of the hearing, Judge Harmon's verdict was clear. "The charges against Miss Feather are dismissed for lack of evidence," he declared. "Furthermore, I am referring Mr. Blackwood for investigation regarding possible perjury and fabrication of evidence." He fixed Blackwood with a stern glare. "The law applies equally to all citizens, regardless of their standing or wealth. Remember that, sir." As they left the courthouse, Fawn felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The ordeal had been frightening, but it had also clarified what mattered most: the man walking beside her, who had risked everything to stand by her side. "What happens now?" she asked as they stood in the autumn sunshine. Xavier took her hand openly, no longer concerned with hiding their connection. "Now we build that life we talked about, together." The following months brought significant changes to both their lives. True to his word, Xavier built an addition to his ranch house, specifically designed with Fawn's input, a space that incorporated elements of Shoshone design alongside Western construction, with large windows to welcome the sunrise and a dedicated area for her medicinal herbs and healing work. Their relationship faced continued opposition from some quarters of Eureka society. Mrs. Hollister refused to serve Fawn in the general store, and several families made a point of crossing the street when they walked together in town. But others, seeing Xavier's unwavering commitment and coming to know Fawn beyond their prejudices, gradually accepted the unusual couple. Judge Harmon, who had stayed in the area to oversee Blackwood's legal troubles, became an unexpected ally. A widower with a scholarly interest in native cultures, he often visited the ranch to learn from Fawn about Shoshone traditions and to exchange books with Xavier. "You've created something remarkable here," the judge commented during one such visit in early spring. "A true bridging of worlds." Xavier, who had been showing him the new corral, smiled. "Fawn deserves most of the credit. She's taught me more than I could ever teach her." "On the contrary," Fawn interjected, joining them with a tray of coffee. Her English had improved dramatically over the months of daily practice with Xavier. "We teach each other. Equal trade." As winter yielded to spring, Xavier surprised Fawn by arranging a special ceremony to formalize their union. Understanding the importance of her cultural traditions, he had reached out to an elder from her mother's band, one of the few who had always treated Fawn with kindness despite her mixed heritage. Under a clear April sky, with Judge Harmon, Sheriff Davis, and a handful of supportive neighbors in attendance, they exchanged vows in both English and Shoshone. The elder blessed their union according to tribal custom, while the judge performed the legal ceremony recognized by territorial law. "Two ceremonies, two traditions, one love," Xavier said, holding Fawn's hands as they stood before their small gathering of witnesses. "Just as you taught me to see the world through two languages, you've shown me that life is richer when different ways of knowing come together in respect." Fawn, dressed in a gown that combined Western styling with Shoshone beadwork she had crafted herself, felt her mother's presence in the spring breeze that stirred around them. "I was person without place," she said, her voice clear and steady, "between two worlds belonging to neither. You did not ask me to choose. You learned my words, respected my ways, made space for all that I am." She smiled up at him. "Now we make new place together where both worlds live in harmony." As summer approached, Fawn discovered she was expecting their first child. The news brought Xavier to tears of joy, and he spent the following months alternating between protective concern for her welfare and excited preparation for the baby's arrival. "Boy or girl, our child will know both languages from the beginning," he declared as they sat on the porch one evening, watching fireflies rise from the grass. "No one will ever mock them for how they speak." Fawn rested her hand on her growing belly. "And they will know the stories of both their bloodlines, the courage of their grandmother who raised a daughter alone among people who feared her, the wisdom of their grandfather who loved to cross boundaries when others would not." Their son was born as autumn painted the hills in gold and crimson, a healthy boy with Xavier's blue eyes and Fawn's dark hair. They named him Thomas Neshoba Fullman, giving him both an English name and a Shoshone one meaning wolf. As Fawn nursed their child in the quiet of their home, Xavier sat beside them, his face filled with wonder and devotion. "Do you remember that day by the creek?" he asked softly. When I asked you to teach me how to say you are beautiful in Shoshone, Fawn smiled, stroking their son's cheek. I remember, you said was useful words for man to know. I was right, Xavier replied, gazing at his wife and child. E Puiuna, he whispered, both of you. In the years that followed, the Fullman Ranch prospered, becoming known for its fine horses and cattle. More significantly, it became a place of healing and learning, where Fawn's medicinal knowledge was sought by people from all backgrounds. Those who had once shunned her for her native tongue now came to her door seeking help for ailments that Western doctors couldn't cure. Xavier continued to expand his understanding of Shoshone language and customs, eventually becoming fluent enough to serve as an interpreter when territorial officials needed to communicate with local tribes. His respect for native traditions and his marriage to Fawn slowly influenced attitudes in Eureka, though change came gradually and not without resistance. Their family grew with the addition of twin daughters 3 years after Thomas's birth. The girls, Sarah Kamama and Elizabeth Pahani, grew up moving seamlessly between English and Shoshone, equally at home on horseback or gathering herbs with their mother. As the children flourished, so did Xavier and Fawn's love for each other. The hardships they had faced together, the prejudice, Blackwood's schemes, the initial struggle to be accepted had forged a bond that only strengthened with time. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier presented Fawn with a special gift, a book he had created, binding together pages where he had carefully transcribed the Shoshone stories and knowledge she had shared with him, illustrated with his own drawings of the plants and animals she had taught him to recognize. So our children's children will know, he explained as she turned the pages with tears in her eyes. So nothing is lost. That night, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues, Fawn reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a frightened young woman gathering herbs alone, shunned for the language she spoke, to a respected healer and mother living in a home where both her worlds were honored. Do you ever regret it? She asked, her head resting against Xavier's shoulder. All you faced because of me. The friends lost, the business turned away. Xavier's arm tightened around her. Not for a single moment, he replied without hesitation. What good is acceptance if it requires denying what matters most? What good are friends who cannot see the worth of the woman I love? From inside the house came the sound of their children's laughter as Thomas read a story to his sisters, his voice switching effortlessly between languages just as his parents had taught him. We made something beautiful, Fawn said softly. Something neither of us could have created alone. Xavier turned to her, his face lined now with a decade of western sun and wind, but his eyes still as bright and certain as the day he had first asked her to teach him her language. That's the secret, isn't it? He said, taking her hand in his. The most beautiful things in this world come from bringing different elements together, different tongues, different traditions, different hearts, and finding the harmony that was waiting there all along. As the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky, Fawn leaned forward to kiss her husband, grateful for the man who had seen her when others looked away, who had valued her words when others mocked them, who had loved her completely when others could see only differences. Teach me more, he had said all those years ago. And every day since, they had continued to learn from each other, creating a love story that bridged worlds and changed both their lives forever.